Thank you everyone for coming. It's wonderful to see a lot of familiar faces and new faces. So hopefully we like to see these events continue to grow. The California chapter is, what, 2 years now? So it's really great to see this group and this network of awesome textile professionals grow. So I'd just like to give a big round of applause for Bolt Threads for having us. I think this is a really, really awesome venue. It's been really fun to find the different hubs around the Bay Area. We've got San Francisco, we've got Alameda, we were at North Face for our Q3 meeting. So it's really fun to also be here in Emeryville as well. First I'll introduce myself. My name is Krystle Moody. I'm the current sustainability pillar chair for the California chapter of the AATCC. Karen wanted me to mention that we are actually hosting elections at the beginning of next year. So if you're interested in getting involved with the group, we definitely have open positions and people that would be willing to step aside and have the next person step in. So now that you know a little bit about me, I'm a sustainable textile consultant. I've worked actually with all of the people on this panel here, these wonderful people. So I'll tell you a little bit about them and their roles, but we'll go into that more later for the panel discussion. And I want you guys to also feel free to, this is a discussion, it's a conversation, so I'll open kind of early for questions in the hour that we're here together. So Diana, are you still here? Diana Wyman? Yeah, do you want to say a little bit about the national organization AATCC for those of us that don't know anything? So Diana's the technical director for AATCC.
Hi. So I'm the technical director. I work in Research Triangle Park where we have our headquarters, but I'm really excited to finally make it out to a section meeting. I've been promising Karen for the last 2 years that I would make it, and this is a fantastic turnout. So in addition to getting involved at this local level, coming to these programs, I definitely encourage you to look at what else AATCC is doing. We have the committee meetings that are coming up in just a couple of weeks. So those are where the actual test methods are put together. If you're using any of those test methods for color fastness, laundering, any of those kinds of things, those are put together by volunteers like you. If you know something that needs to be changed, there's a problem with the method, a new method's needed, that's the place to come. So be a part of that. You can participate. We actually have some of the meetings offered remotely this time. So go online, register for the remote meetings, at least kind of call in, listen in, see what's happening. We're constantly doing programs on different topics. We just did one on LED lighting for color evaluation. And then there's publications and there's networking and all kinds of other resources. If you have any questions, by all means, grab me at some point and we can talk. But AHC has a lot to offer. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, getting together with these folks here.
So I'll introduce our panelists a little bit, but I really want them to tell you about themselves more than me. I don't want to be the one talking most of the time, because I will if you let me. So Jamie Bainbridge, the VP of Product Development here at Bolt Threads. She'll tell you a little bit about what they're doing here, what their technology is, and actually after the panel, we'll be splitting people into groups to do a short hallway tour. So for those of you that kind of saw a few pieces of equipment through the windows coming in, Jamie will help explain what's going on behind the glass. And we've got Carol Hsu, the Senior Sustainability Coordinator for the North Face. She'll be talking a little bit about their wonderful programs that they have at the North Face for sustainable textile systems. Linda Gross with the California College of Arts in San Francisco, also a very wonderful author and educator. I've been following your work since I was a student, so it's so good to have you here. Scott Ragsdale with Houston Textile. They're a new weaving mill out of Rancho Cordova, California. For those of you that don't know that, where that is, that's just a little bit further than Sacramento on the 50. Ryan couldn't be here tonight, but Scott is definitely well-versed on their weaving equipment as well and what their business is up to. And then finally, Margot Lyons, the production and sustainability manager. I love that title at Koyuchi. They do sustainable home goods, and they're based in San Francisco area. So thank you again to all the panelists for being here. We're really excited. And yeah, I'll dig in. In our event description, we asked, what are the key elements we need to build resilient and textile and apparel systems that support people, planet, and profit? Let's start with digging into what we mean by resilience. This is not a new word for the textile industry. If you look it up on textileglossary.com, you'll find the following definition. Resiliency, the ability of a fabric to spring back to its original shape after being twisted, crushed, wrinkled, or distorted in any way. We also talk about it with loft and insulation as well, how resilient the insulation is when being compressed. Similarly, we define resilient textile and apparel systems as having the ability to sustain both financial growth and at the same time make an overall positive impact on people and the environment. They have the ability to rebuild and cultivate new healthy living systems that have previously been ignored or overused. They are highly adaptive and inspired by nature, where every input and output has a usefulness, achieving complete circularity or a cradle to cradle, or we'll hear this later, soil to soil life cycle. All of the companies and the people up here tonight are folks that have stories about their resiliency and their path to build sustainable textile and apparel systems. The first place I'd like to start our panel discussion is with people, because to me, the people are really the ones that make resiliency work. So we'll dig into the companies later. So we have to pass this mic around, so I apologize in advance, but it's for the people that are live streaming. We also will have a recording that you guys can watch later. In 3 to 5 minutes, tell us a little bit about yourself, your current role, and the moment or time in your life that brought you into the world of sustainable textiles. Maybe you were already in the industry, maybe it was a time in your childhood, but why sustainable textiles?
I think for me, my story with sustainable textiles began when I was running materials research for Nike. And we decided to try to include a small proportion of organic cotton into our programs, our t-shirt program at Nike. We were at 2% blend, and that was all the organic cotton we could find in the world to be able to blend into our yarns. It was a very successful program and grew and grew and grew into the programs that Nike runs today, which are much broader than just a 2% blend of organic cotton. I then went to a company that I helped found in Portland called Now, and it's a company based on sustainable textiles and trying to do the best we could with what we had available to us and to try and push the textile industry forward. I've got lots and lots of stories about trying to do that at that small a scale. It was a great challenge. It's made progress that I think is incredible. It's really, the whole effort has just blossomed, and there are so many people doing so many good things now. So that's the story of how I got here. And I've been here for the last 3 years working on this piece of it, which you'll hear more about later.
Hi, I'm Carol Hsu from the North Face, and I first got into sustainable textiles back in college at UC Davis. My senior year for my fashion collection, I researched organic cotton and did a lot of natural dyeing and was pretty much hooked after that. And went to work for a really small women's sustainable clothing company in Ventura. And 80% of our production was done domestically. And so Made in America has a special place in my heart because I visited our factories almost, well, on a weekly basis and worked with some really great people. And I've been at the North Face for almost 3 years now.
Hi, so Linda Gross, and I have a conventional fashion design background. And it was when I was working at Esprit as a regular designer in the late 80s that the owner of the company then, Doug Tompkins, who was a big outdoors person, along with Yvonne Chenard at Patagonia, decided to bring sustainability into their businesses. And we were doing an eco audit at the time, looking at energy and water efficient systems in the building and so on. And we also had major environmentalists come into the company and talk to us. So people like Fritjof Capra, David Bowie, David Brower, Dave Foreman, Paul Ehrlich, Mark Reisner, talking about water in California, all this whole range of, you know, people I'd never even thought of before. Certainly people that didn't help me to get a spec sheet out to Hong Kong by the end of the day. And it was just, you know, as being a young designer, exposed to these things, started to think of what relevance those things that were being talked about, wildlands preservation, water in California, whatever it might be, how they related to product development, and started to scratch the surface of fashion and look at those impacts and come up with some viable alternatives, which later on became a clothing line called E-Collection that was launched in 1992. And in bringing that to market, and it lasted until 1995, I had the bug, and that was that. When I left Esprit, I've focused on sustainability ever since, and working anywhere where I felt I was useful, whether it's with artisans and micro enterprise development, or teaching the next generation of designers so that they can hit the ground running, or writing about it, or working as a consultant in the industry and so on.
Hello, my name's Scott Ragsdale. I'm with Houston Textile. We are the only commercial-sized weaver in Northern California. And I grew up here. In fact, I used to play a lot in Tilden Park, pulling, having little branches of eucalyptus behind me and building forts, and very a kid originally, and then moved to the valley with my folks. So a lot of nature experiences here in Northern California that were really important to me. Yeah, I can. What I guess as far as my role at Houston Textile, what I wanted to cover real quick is before I got to Houston Textile, I was in the solar industry. I had gone from biological sciences, neurosciences in particular, and wanted to work in academia until I figured out that a lot of people don't pay attention to academia, and they were paying a lot of attention to the commercial interests. So I decided to learn a lot about that, and in doing so have always tried to bend the needle or turn the needle toward more holistic and natural processes that don't hurt the planet so much. So I'm new to textile, but I'm not new to renewable or regenerative thinking. And my role at Houston Textile is to help them develop business plans and commercialize the company such that it can develop cloth at much greater scale. So that's my role at Houston. Thanks.
Okay, and as Krystle said, I'm Margot, and I work at Koyuchi. We're just across the bay in San Francisco. Koyuchi, if you're not familiar with us, we do sustainable home textiles. Sustainability is really the core of our business, so it covers marketing, sales, finance, operations. And for product, which is the team I work on, it's really built into the concept phase. So before we even start developing, we'll have a target or commitment for a specific product besides for our brand. So my role is to work with our vendors on how to achieve those commitments, which is pretty great. In terms of my background, so before I came to Koyuchi, I was at UC Davis, where I actually met Carol. And I went through their textiles and clothing program, which had an amazing breadth from fibers and materials, dyeing and finishing. And then Carol and I actually also worked on a project where we got to actually see firsthand like how business can help change for good. So we started a reuse store, which is on campus and still operating today. So just want to throw that out there.
Great, thank you all. So I'm going to start with Jamie here to really dig into the company. We're all excited to be here and see today. We're in this beautiful building. We walked by a lab and a fermentation room on the way to get here. What is Bolt Threads and what do you make here?
Well, good setup, Krystle. We are in the business of making a recombinant spider silk fiber.
Ooh.
So what does that really mean? What it means is that we take water and sugar and yeast and we ferment them, and those yeast produce a particular chain of amino acids for us that becomes a silk.
Wow.
And then we will, as you go through the tour, you'll see, but we take that protein, which is in a powder form, and we make a polymer out of it. And then all of you will recognize the equipment from then on, which is a wet spinning system. And we spin fiber and collect it on spools. So that's the real layperson's explanation of it. That we have some of our scientists here tonight, and if any of you want to know more about those things, please engage them in conversation. From my perspective as a textile person, this has been an absolutely amazing challenge to come into something that doesn't yet exist in the way of a fiber and try and turn it into a viable textile. And then when I started to look at what it could be in terms of a sustainable textile, if you think about the inputs being completely renewable, water, sugar, and yeast, and you start to understand the potential that is in spider silk for performance attributes that we can actually engineer into that protein, things like high stretch, high strength, softness. We can begin to engineer these fibers so that we don't have to add additional chemistry to those fibers to do a lot of the things that all of us do today with chemistry. And then at the end of the life of this fiber, it's a protein, so it's going to biodegrade. So what a wonderful story to start from as a platform and a clean slate where we don't have to go into a messy, filthy textile mill and try to convince them to revamp their processes that they've run for way too many years. We're starting with a clean slate, and we can build the processes that we're building from the beginning and build them right. So it's just been an amazing project to work on. And this is really a technology platform. It's not just one fiber that we're going to be making. So we're going to start with one fiber, and then there will be other fibers that have completely different characteristics than that first fiber. And so it's really a platform of fibers eventually when we get to it. Okay.
And maybe I'll go right back to you, but definitely all the people on this panel have worked with these hyper-regional production models. So for you here, you've got, it's all soup to nuts at the moment. So I'd love to just hear a little bit about the opportunities, the benefits, the challenges of working on these hyper-regional production models, the North Face with your backyard program, Linda working with the Sustainable Cotton Project, you know, I can just keep going down the line. So if each of you could say a little bit about working regionally and what that has provided for you, what are the benefits and opportunities that you've seen from that, and the major challenges?
Great. For us, the benefit is that we can go really fast. And we've got a huge problem to solve. It's got so many variables. And the fact that we can do everything from biology all the way through to final fiber. And now we actually own knitting equipment. We have a little bit of in-house carding equipment and spinning equipment. And to be able to work with regional producers to get this little tiny effort off the ground so that we have the ability to enter commercial systems. So for us, that's really been amazing to have it all right here in the building.
So at the North Face, actually back when Krystle was with us, in 2012, we started working on the Backyard Project. It was a challenge to create a hoodie within 150 miles of our headquarters in Alameda, which is a very hard challenge because we don't have a lot of those textile processing capabilities in this state anymore. And that was a project that we did with Fiber Shed. They're a really amazing organization based out of Marin. And then the Backyard Project hoodie was launched in 2014. We had 2 more versions of that collection, and then it evolved into the Cali wool beanie. And so again, Fiber Shed came to us and Krystle with this amazing wool that is called Climate Beneficial Wool, and it's from a ranch in Northern California, out in Eagleville. And the ranch is actually implementing a carbon plan on their land that sequesters 6 to 9 times the amount of emissions it generates each year for its wool production. So it's pretty amazing. This wool has a net negative carbon impact. And finally came out with this beanie 2 years after starting this project. So we're really happy it's out in stores right now.
So I think I'll probably pull it to a bit of a broader view. So, and the one I'll choose, well, with eCollection, we did make everything locally except for the artisanal products and those of course were overseas, but we had a reason for going overseas for tag-one-up buttons or recycled buttons in Ghana or whatever it might be. But I'll focus on the Sustainable Cotton Project, which, you know, when I left Esprit in 1995, around about 1996 is when I first joined them, and we still do. We just did one of the big farm tours, but are well known for those originally being organic cotton farm tours that brought people like Yvonne Chenard on and convinced folks to do organic. And I was responsible to communicate what was happening in the field. So the technical stuff that was going on in the field, making it visual and enticing and alluring to textile people who didn't really know about that stuff at that time. And it was great traveling with this farmer, talking about this stuff and being able to answer these questions. And relatively successful in terms of building awareness and education about organic as being a viable alternative, until you realize that you're in the midst of these bigger systems and trading systems and political systems and NAFTA, and then people moving from producing here in the US overseas and including sourcing organic overseas, where the cost for labor was just so radically less that we couldn't compete. The California farmers couldn't compete with that price point. And yet you're working in a biological system, so it's highly localized. California, it's capital intensive, it's chemical intensive, so it has some unique problems that are worthy of people's attention. And yet the organic market, had moved overseas. So the way that we came at that problem was to look at what we were doing with farmers to get them involved in biological systems. And my job, after raising awareness of organic, was to raise awareness of cleaner cotton, which was farmers using integrated pest management, reducing chemical use by about 73%, not using genetically modified seed, and so on. And it got traction, I think, because of the integrity of where we came from and just the realities that everybody in the industry understood. But it's still hyper-local, and since then, Better Cotton Initiative, which is global and easier for people to buy into as global companies, so it's still small, but boy, does it do good work in the field. And it really changes the mindsets of conventional farmers. So at that level, it's a big success. It's not a success, I would say, in terms of, volume of fabric in the marketplace. Okay.
So the challenge at Houston starts with the equipment, because it's a manufacturing facility. We're making we're weaving cloth, and we're using vintage looms that were mostly manufactured in Pennsylvania. and they come from the 1920s and 1960s. And so part of it is just getting the equipment here, you know, to make it regional in the first place, and to make sure it works, and it makes fabric at a quality level that's outstanding. And that is something that Houston has done. And then the second half of it is supply, and that is the materials, the yarn, and where it comes from. And we can get the fiber here, but we can't necessarily get it twisted and spun here or dyed yet. And these are things that we want to have done regionally, and we look forward to doing. But those are the challenges, because as a weaver, you know, we're looking at making sure we have supply, that we have the demand that the customers are interested in, so that we can set the stage for a fairly long turnaround. I mean, by the time we figure out that someone's interested in the fabric, we're looking at 4 months minimum to get that fabric to them at our minimums. So we have a lead time. We have customers that are interested in particular kinds of fabrics, and they need to be sensitized to the idea that we're going to have to work together to get this fabric to work for them, because it's not something that just happens. We don't have a backstock of 20,000 yards of something. You know, our backstock is, you know, what you're willing to buy at the time.
Yeah, I think what you just said, and especially what Linda said about challenges, are true for Koyuchi. So most of our production is overseas, like 90%, 85% is coming from India, because our biggest fiber is organic cotton, and that's the biggest organic cotton market. So since I've been there in the last 5 years, we've tried to target specific products and product categories that we can have made here in the US. But our challenge is, so one category is like filled inserts. So we have down feather wool inserts that are made here in the US, but those manufacturers are importing fabric, or importing, well, they're not importing the down fill, but that could be a case. So the spinning is an issue we've had in the past year, a spinner move, and weaving is an issue. So we have wide width goods. Our biggest business is in sheets, and we can't get that domestically. Cost, it is certainly a higher labor cost here, but our products do have a higher price point. So if there were partners that could meet our volume needs, that, you know, might be an easier place to compromise. But it really is a lack of a full supply chain. That's what we run up against the most. That being said, in filled products, because we do have things like wool, FiberShed has been a really great resource for us in terms of connecting us with farmers here in Marin, and being able to talk about how we can integrate materials. It's just really, it's always a really slow process, and involves a lot of collaboration and talking like sort of in a network rather than just linearly, which I think is maybe has been a more traditional way to approach supply chain.
Can I just add a little positive note about cleaner cotton? 73% of it was in the backyard hoodie. I know. I can't believe I forgot to do that.
I know.
And it was because it was blended with colored cotton, which was a shorter fiber and more expensive, and 73% was the right blend to increase the quality and get the right price point.
Yep. Regional models, even in this panel. So I talked about hyper-regionality. Another concept for resilient textile and apparel systems is this idea of circularity, cradle to cradle, soil to soil. I believe probably every panelist also has an example of a program that they're working on, or maybe it's just implemented into the values that their company are attempting to go forward. But I'm going to start with Margot on the end, because I know you guys actually have a really interesting program that you've launched pretty recently, right, for Koyuchi and the circular systems.
Yeah, so as I was saying, so our biggest mission is to work with organic cotton, most of it coming from overseas. Like 90% of our assortment is organic cotton, the rest being other natural fibers, organic linen, wool, down, and feathers, as I mentioned. So something we've always been committed to is reducing waste, trying to be zero waste. So that's easy when you're weaving sheets to size, towels to size. But we do have other kinds of products like sleepwear, apparel, table linens, things like that. And we do create waste. So we have an amazing team. We tend to donate any scraps in-house. We've had really great collaborations actually with Linda's students at CCA, with a zero waste designer in Brooklyn called Zero Waste Daniel. This past March, we launched a totally new program. So taking a step further towards the circular economy. It's called Koyuchi for Life, and it's a subscription program where you can sign up for 6, 12, 24-month periods of time to basically rent some of our basic sheets, duvets, and towels, sort of the things you will use more frequently and possibly more hard than some of your other textiles. And we're partnering with a group called the Renewable Workshop, which they're in Oregon. They're an awesome company committed to reducing waste and recovering value. So basically you're a subscriber, you've got like the white sateen sheets. After your 12 months or 24 months is up, you would send them back to Renewable Workshop. So what they do, they have a team dedicated to inspecting and sorting textiles. They have a machine that's a waterless wash machine. It uses liquid CO2, so it really cleans the textiles much more efficiently than water would, and it doesn't have the water waste. And so what they'll do is then be able to, so we haven't figured this part out, but we'll either resell or they can resell the used products. So it's keeping these products out of the landfill. They already work with apparel, sort of outdoor brands, and they've found that like 85% of what they get from those brands can be resold with really minor work. So it goes through the wash process. Maybe it needs, maybe some threads need to be clipped, some buttons need to be fixed on a duvet or something, but really minor work, and it can be resold. So we're really excited about this. We've had a really great response. It's sort of exceeded our expectations. This launched in March. So we've started getting the first round of subscriptions back, but not at a volume where we can really tell how many are going to be resold, where we're going to need to resell these. But the ultimate vision of this is to be able to take these products, say you have like super soiled towels, you can't really resell those, but we'd eventually want to have a partner who could tear those towels up. We'd have a spinner respin them, and then you'd weave them back into towels, and that would be the ultimate circular vision that we're all trying to achieve. So yeah.
Okay. Anybody? I can hand it off to someone who's feeling particularly interested in this one, but I could also add. For Houston, the mission is to make excellent cloth, domestically sourced, organic, whenever we can. Recently, we're just now putting on the loom a botanically dyed denim, which is 100% organic. And we went to great lengths to make sure that we had the indigo, and the dyeing company did a great job. It's a limited run, but the idea here is let's find out what the ultimate really does. Who's really interested in botanically dyed denim, and find out exactly what that market looks like. It's going to be a fantastic fabric, but I'll tell you that it was not easy to put it together. And so for us, the mission's going to be, all right, how do we as a company move forward as organically, and it probably got certified is where we're going to go on a day-to-day run. So that's the experience we're getting when we're looking at how close can we go to our mission with regenerative.
Yeah, in terms of, I'm glad you brought up the example of renewable apparel and the work that you're doing, because I actually don't like the term circular. I know it's a big, a big thing at the moment, but I do like more of a visual of loops. And where, because if everybody in the room, I'll take a little bit of, as a designer, a little bit of a different tact. If you think of the garment, you might have a garment. If everybody in the room thought about a garment that they have kept for a long time and why, and perhaps a person that's associated with it, then you, and everyone in the room has got several of those stories, then you quickly realize that garments are more than just a production line or a, you know, a set of materials and processes. And they have these lived lives after retail. And that space of sharing, that the social loops of sharing, and the new business models that are emerging from that, whether it's subscription services or renting or whatever it might be, long-term leasing. There are some emergent business models that are coming up there that I'm really very much interested in. And then how do we as designers, especially young designers that I'm around, design for those kinds of systems? So yeah, and then some of my own more experimental work is looking at how could, with a single garment, with additional processing perhaps, or whatever it might be, how can they be designed to evolve over time and deliver a second or a third or a fourth hit of desire at the customer level? So looking at the, you know, production's one side and the consumer level or the wearer level being at the, on the other side of the same coin.
I'm going to bring this up just because Rick is here right now, but I think one other way to think about this with circular systems is also because we live in the age of fast fashion. It's like, it's not just what are you going to do with those clothes that are being worn for like a month, but how do you extend the life of the clothes so that they can be worn for a longer time and then put them into another system. And we've had our warranty for how long, Rick? I don't actually know how many years. For a really long time at the North Face. We've got this amazing new building where we have a room full of these warranty technicians who are so skilled. They know our product like inside and out. We have a huge room full of old trims from like, I don't know, the 70s and the 80s. It's actually really fun to go back there and just see like old North Face patches. But I think that's something else to think about is how do you keep products in use for as long as you can before you have to figure out that next life for them. And that's one way of doing
that. Not yet. All right, well, I'd love to open for questions from the audience. We've got about just over 15 minutes now. So does anyone have a yearning, burning question they want to ask? All right, Rick.
It is vintage loom machinery, not dissimilar to that used by the recently announced closure of Cone Denim. So it is the equipment is the draper loom primarily is what we use, the X3 specifically. It is a, I believe, Ryan will tell me if I'm wrong, but it's approximately 47 inches loom state. It goes down to a 43 when it's finished. And we do chambray, which I'm wearing, this is a heavy chambray. We do lighter chambrays. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. 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 Yeah, just to follow up on that, Ryan is both a mathematical and engineering just gifted individual, and his ability, he also is extremely amiable, and people like the fact that he's working on these old looms and they save equipment for him so that he can put it back together. Yeah.
But in the meantime, how do you incentivize fashion companies that don't already have a commitment to ethical business models to be more mindful in their production processes. So basically, like, do you feel that there are certain industries that are missing from the conversation of sustainable supply chain strategies? And do you think that it's something that even like the government needs to take a stand in and enforce more policies and laws?
First of all, no, I don't think government, it needs to come from government. It needs to come from within industry if it's going to at all complement what we do and work with us. Secondly, I think, you know, in my discussions with companies who are not involved in these activities at all, they are so overwhelmed by the complexity and they don't know where to start. And so if they can be pointed towards organizations that can help them start, usually they'll get a start on it and it'll get going. But I think it's a very, very, you know, to those of us who are in it, we don't find it so daunting anymore. It's a very complex subject.
I've just got a few examples from convincing the management and the owners at Esprit back, you know, when I had to do that. And that was to look at what the company was known for and then use that as the entry point to present a sustainability approach. So the one example I'll give is when just looking at color, like Esprit was very colorful. There was no way that we could do unbleached, undyed, even though that was popular in the early 90s. That it would not be a big seller for one season, and it certainly wouldn't last for two. So knowing that we had to approach color and then asking the right questions of, actually come to think of it, Nelson Hauser at Ciba-Geigy, who used to be the president of AATCC back in a while since. But he was the one who actually said, oh, we have a dye type and a dye system that could meet some energy, water, and toxicity standards that you could call more sustainable. So it was cold pad batch and fiber reactive dyes, bifunctional fiber reactive dyes that were fairly new at the time. But that gave a range of colors that were available that the salespeople just didn't even question. You know, they were like, oh, we can do this. So, you know, if you're smart about the way you present something or the way you research something and make it appropriate, you're not stretching it too far away from the familiar of the company that you're working with, I think is where you might get an inroad.
Very quickly, one would be scarcity. I mean, there's only one Houston Textile, which is now probably the only domestic weaver or near to it in the United States. So we're going to be interesting to a lot of people. And if you want U.S. domestic woven, you're going to have to look hard. So that's one. And the other side is a little bit of shaming. It's like there are people who don't just need to know that what they're doing now is killing the planet. So, you know, just to put it in bluntly, and if they don't change, their customer base, particularly younger people, are going to leave. So that should do it.
I would also add, don't underestimate the power of consumers and voting with your dollars and voting, or, you know, spending your money wisely on companies that you feel resemble your values. I'm sure, you know, I would say probably all of the big companies are looking at consumer insights research very carefully and looking at what millennials are doing and how they're spending their money. And they know that they're values driven. And so that's a really great driver for business to shape up and, you know, follow suit if they want to keep getting their business.
Sorry for my cough too. I'm trying to think of how to word this question to kind of relate to all the stuff that's gone on this past year as well and all the changes. But I got into the industry in the late 90s, and at that point in time, I know that the idea of eco was kind of this, you know, special thing that a few people did, but it was very much against the grain. And so, you know, for those of you who've been involved in it much earlier, it feels like a very long haul, a very long slog that it's clear that you've been doing, and to really stick that out. And it feels like in the last 15 years now, we're starting to see a tipping. I don't know if we're at the full tipping point yet, but we're getting to that critical place where more people now, it's becoming a trend, trendy, acceptable, fashionable to whatever, be responsible and think about these things. And I'm curious about, like, this past year, we've seen really in the industry that we've had so many shifts, so many changes politically, whatnot. And with all the different things that are going on, how is that affecting what you're doing just within this last year? I'm just curious how what's happening now is pushing this in a good, difficult, like, is it going in a good direction? Is it going, are you hopeful? I'm not sure what my question is, but it's like, wow, a lot's changing. And what are you guys seeing for this topic of sustainability? So does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Scott, I was thinking you could start with maybe talking about the community supported cloth program and how funding changes. Just a little bit about the program, and then how the USDA grant that was associated with it really supported you then, and the idea was eventually it would continue to be funded through that program.
The foundation money, right? Yeah, okay. So very briefly, community supported cloth, it's a purchase forward. So a large community of folks, the Round Fibershed, organized by Fibershed, focus their energy around the weaving of the climate beneficial wool, which this is made out of, right? And I have a couple other things here. But the idea is that this is a commitment that people are participating in to see the road is paved for beneficial products, textiles. That's pretty much a summary. Yeah. Anybody else wants to answer the question? And if I may paraphrase, if you don't mind, the idea is that, so what's the momentum? Is there momentum in this eco-green area? And I'll just add, at the mezzanine designer level, not at the 20,000 yard level, there's a lot of interest in what we're doing.
Yeah, I know we do have people on our team who are paying attention to what's happening in the Farm Bill, and I don't know if Linda or anyone else has more knowledge about that, because I don't. I will say we definitely have momentum internally at Koyuchi for working towards more domestic product. I haven't quite seen the influx of investment in like a sudden transformation, and all of a sudden we have like all these mills to go to. But one program I didn't talk about because of time is a new wool blanket we launched a month ago, I guess, called the Tahoe blanket. And so we partnered with, that's a fully US supply chain. And that's something we'd been talking about for years, trying to achieve. It was sort of made possible by standards like Fibershed's climate beneficial wool, Textile Exchange, which is another nonprofit focused on sustainability that we're members of. They have worked the past 2 years on a responsible wool standard. So this particular blanket we launched was part of that program. So that really opened up avenues again and helped us collaborate to come together and build a supply chain. In part, I think, because of not only enthusiasm and commitment for working domestically, but also just for working like driven by our values. The particular rancher we work with is like 1,000% committed towards progressive land management, towards land stewardship, towards best practices around animal welfare. And they're selling their meat to the local restaurants. They're selling their fiber to makers of all sizes. and really driven towards having an industry that's collaborating together to support improving land and water. And yeah.
It was a big question. So I would say, if, you know, for any of us who've been in it for a long time, it goes, and from a fashion standpoint to trends, there are the ones that are retail trends that, you know, do this. And then there's the long-term trends. And and you get green fatigue, you know, so it's on the front of Cosmopolitan, whatever it might be, and then it's not, you know. And what I have found is, so for example, in the early 90s, there was a big eco trend, and unbleached, undyed, and then suddenly polyester microfibers and, you know, fluorescent green were, you know, the fashion trend, the pendulum swung, and then it, you know, then it comes back again. So the trend went like this. But if you look at the long-term trend, it's always doing that. It's a little bit like real estate, where it, you know, might, but it's always going up. And so now there's lots of mega trends that are just converging with millennials coming into their own, lots of work that's been done at the educational level, you know, to build awareness about ecological issues, you know, in curricula, sharing economies, online platforms that make crowdfunding and this type of work that you're talking about, where you put it out that this is available, and when there's enough people interested, we'll go into production. All of these things are converging, and I think it's incredibly exciting. Well, not to mention new technologies, then also, you know, so for, you know, just being with students also over the years, there's so much more to talk about now than just the impacts in the supply chain. And they're aware of themselves in, you know, all these different layers of things that are going on, that they can choose which part to be part of, you know, situate themselves in professionally. I wish I was at college again. I mean, it's really exciting.
I think for me, when I try to measure what is the real change that's happening, if you look at the most conservative group of people within our whole industry, it would probably be the equipment manufacturers, be the people making looms and knitting machines and dyeing systems and all of the equipment we use. When I was at ITMA last year, the only thing that anybody was talking about was their equipment and what kind of energy and water and chemical reductions they had made in their equipment. So when you've got that conservative group of people putting the money and the energy into making their product more efficient, then you start to see real change. So I am very hopeful.
My question relates to, I guess, in hearing all of your stories, I've heard kind of, I'm calling them pain points. These are things that, you know, are tough when you do sustainable work. Supply chain, it takes longer, takes more time. It's more collaborative versus linear discussions. And I was wondering, as someone who's kind of wrapping their head around this, what kind of pain points do you experience around the functionality of these products that you're trying to develop? Do you feel like there's a missing component in the palette you have to work with? And does this hinder you? Does this excite you? How does this impact you from kind of the functional component of the product or textile you're developing?
In terms of local production in America, specifically. Sustainable. Yeah. Well, we've got a lot of our materials team here, and they'll tell you there are challenges. I think when we hit pain points like that, in terms of, you know, maybe a color that we want we can't get that color, or a material's performance because it's a sustainable material isn't as great as its virgin counterpart. A lot of times it is talking about, you know, talking with materials and figuring out, and with Rick, and figuring out, you know, what's an acceptable tolerance level. We can also talk to our product team, our RD&D teams, and have them design around the issues that might come up. So it's more of a design challenge for them in many cases, which sustainability really is just a big design challenge. In terms of US production particularly, I think a lot of the capabilities that we used to have here are just not here anymore. And so when you think about a very technical company like the North Face and the materials that we use in a lot of our products, we are limited here in what we can do.
The feedback's not the same. What was I going to say? So I would agree with that usually it's a design entry point. So usually a pain point is a point of next stage innovation. So for example, we were one of the early users of Textile. And at that time, some of you might remember, I know there's some, yes, it fibrillated. It had, and it, you know, created these balls on the surface. And then we discovered enzyme washes at the time that were, you know, through Novozymes, and we'd never used enzyme washes before. So, you know, and that took that furriness off the surface. So it'll either indicate some other innovation that's going to come up from someone else, and especially if you're the North Face with a certain amount of volume, I imagine that you can ask for, you know, a solve on something, you know, if you're a certain volume, or, you know, but for, you know, philosophically speaking, it's a point of innovation.
Yeah, our textiles are, you know, pretty, I think, simple compared to something like Carol's selling. But just one example is on towels. A lot of towels on the market have lots of extra things on them in terms of chemicals, and they get really soapy and soft. At Koyuchi, we like to remove those. So in terms of a design entry point, we find that the towels actually work arguably better when you remove things, chemicals specifically. So that's an example from.
And I'll just quickly say that the pain points that normally are experienced for Houston Textile are actually to our advantage. We make what is close to handwoven, and it has little changes in the fabric over the plane of the fabric, so you can, it's sort of endearing. So, but we're looking forward to having other larger pain points when we have lots more fabric.
It's 7:30, so I'm gonna wrap up, but I've got one last closing question for the group. And that's, what is one thing that the people in this room can do to either help your company build resiliency, or what is a resource that you can suggest to them that they can bring back to their lives or their careers for really moving sustainable textile systems forward? Just really fast.
I think supporting these very small, fragile supply chains that we're trying to get going in this country again is one of the best things that your companies can do.
Yeah, I would agree. I think voting with your dollars and spending your money wisely for companies whose values align with your own and are doing things that you want to see happen again and again. Buy their products because they worked really hard to get them out there.
Yeah, the brand is all powerful, isn't it? It's the PO. It's a pull through the supply chain. Nothing happens without that PO being written. But I would add to that too is make space for young designers coming out in your sustainability areas, because we're educating them, and sometimes they come out and they know more than they're asked to do, actually.
So you all represent the pull of the industry in the sense that you're looking at the textile and asking what can you do with it most of the time, and we are looking also at the push that is the investor. Houston is looking at capitalizing, So if you know social impact people who might be interested in what we're doing, that tends to be where we resonate most.
I would say maybe share something that you learned today, or you still have a question on or thought was kind of cool. Because like what has already been said, I think we vote with our dollars, and also in terms of collaboration or building networks. Your communities, your friends, your families will trust things that you share. So.